DaviePHD's Mythbusters, 23rd of July 2020. The Broad Shoulders Myth. These episodes are a new feature I've been toying with, but the visit of our esteemed Prime Minister to Scotland today has hastened its arrival. Many things are said about various issues surrounding Scotland, the UK, the EU, independence, money, etc. So in these videos I'm going to bust the myths that many believe. This week's myth is that the broad shoulders of the UK economy continue to prop up Scotland. Whenever I hear this one, it winds me right up. I've heard it a lot today. Messrs Gove, Johnson, Mundell, Sunak, Jack Duguid and Bowie, not David Bowie, R.I.P., trot this one out all the time. There's only one problem though. It's bollocks. We all agree that things like roads, hospitals, schools, soldiers, emergency services, etc. are expensive and do need to be funded. We need these things for our country to survive, and these things need to be paid for. COVID-19 adds to that burden. But it is not true to even suggest that the broad shoulders of the UK Treasury are supporting us in these difficult times, or any times for that matter. Scotland is rich in all natural resources, not just oil and gas. We have water, hydropower, wind and tidal energy, enough arable land to feed ourselves 10 times over. Our larger neighbour next door has less of those things, and in the cases of oil, gas and water, much less. But fortunately for our UK, Scotland is still attached to them, so instead of paying Scotland a fair whack for these precious gifts, they just get to take them for free, and in many cases they have squandered them. With the world economy being based on oil prices, our leaders failed to exercise the astuteness of our friends across the water in Norway, and have recklessly squandered our nation's natural wealth for their own ends. So the UK doesn't actually have any money. The UK just has debt. £2.3 trillion of national debt. To explain this, it's necessary to explore Scotland's finances. Last year, and pre-COVID, we raised £55 billion in taxes. This gets paid into the UK Exchequer, and we received £29 billion back for Scottish Government expenditure. The UK Exchequer kept £26 billion. But that's not quite the full story. Firstly, no oil and gas revenues are ever attributed to Scotland. They never have been. More on this in another video, but even after devolution, none of the oil revenues have ever been paid into a Scottish Government bank account. Secondly, if a product is made in Scotland by a Scottish company but transported to England for export, it is internally recorded as an English export. Scotch whisky from Murray, Brewdog beer from Ellen, all recorded as English exports, just due to the port of their departure from the UK. So it's clear that there's some mathematical trickery going on to convince us that we as a nation are poorer than we actually are. Whilst for some strange, inexplicable reason precise official figures are not available, it is conservatively estimated that with 8.4% of the UK population, Scotland generates 9.8% of UK GDP, 9.8% of UK tax receipts, and an even higher proportion of UK export duties. This clearly demonstrates that Scotland is out earning, out income taxing, and out export taxing our UK per capita. It's also necessary to explore UK finances. Britain used to rule a third of the world and was once a very wealthy country indeed, despite being so small in comparison to other nations. But 2 world wars put paid to that, and whilst we were victorious in both instances, it wasn't without cost, and not just in personnel, but in cash. Spending most of our reserves during World War I and having to borrow to win World War II hit us hard, and we're still paying those debts today. Various stock market fluctuations over the years, the 2008 financial crash, have hit us hard. In a polar opposite to the official story, the broad shoulders of Scottish mineral wealth actually stopped the UK from going bankrupt in the 1970s. Now, before the Tories came to power in 2010, our national debt was £0.9 trillion. That took 70 years to run up. It was 2.3 trillion pre-COVID. After just 10 years of Tory rule, it had more than doubled. So what does all that mean? Well, whenever we need something expensive or some big disaster befalls us, the UK needs to borrow money. Lots of money. Despite repeatedly requesting more fiscal autonomy for Scotland, we've been repeatedly denied that right. So it is only right and proper that the UK Exchequer funds the extra Scottish Government expenditure brought about by COVID-19. But they're not doing it from the 26 billions of ours that they've already pocketed. They're doing it with borrowed money. To be clear, I don't blame Rishi Sunak for this. I think he's doing a fine job as the UK Chancellor. I happen to think he's probably the only one of Boris Johnson's cabinet who is halfway competent. Interestingly, this is the first time we've ever had a qualified financial professional in charge of UK finance. The COVID response has so far cost the UK £190 billion. By the end of the nightmare, it is expected to cost us £300 billion. And while I applaud Rishi Sunak for securing the loans, I won't be tugging my forelock in thanks should I ever meet him, or if I'm really unlucky, ever encounter his boss. The reason being that when this thing has gone full circle and these debts have been repaid, it'll be you and I, the humble taxpayers, who have actually bailed ourselves out. To paraphrase that immortal scene in the movie Top Gun, Rishi Sunak has written a cheque that all of our bodies have to cash. How could Scotland do better? We already are. Despite being 8.4% of the UK populace, we've only been given 5.3% of the COVID funds so far. Despite that per capita shortfall, we have managed COVID better and spent the cash more wisely, leading to a, shall we say, a less negative outcome. In just one example of UK financial COVID competence, they have so far spent £13 million on a contact tracing app, which doesn't work, whilst the annoyingly frugal and shockingly competent Irish government paid just £773,000 for one which works perfectly. As a little aside, do you remember all those Englishman, Irishman, Scotsman jokes where the Irish guy always ended up being the punchline? I think that might have to change going forwards. But the ultimate example of financial prudence remains Norway, who didn't have to borrow anything for their COVID-19 response. They just merely dipped into their already massively deep pockets and just paid for everything. And they still have lots of cash left over. So, to summarise, while the UK response could have been better, and thereby cheaper, I obviously don't blame the UK government for COVID-19. But successive UK governments are directly responsible for us being in a position where borrowing was the only way out. And while Rishi Sunak has done well to secure these loans, merely holding the pen to sign the papers doesn't mean that you have the broad shoulders. In fact, it's the broad shoulders of the UK workforce who will ultimately bear this heavy burden, and who will ultimately bail themselves out. Scotland, as part of the UK, has already saved the Union from bankruptcy once. And with our larger per capita contribution to the Exchequer than our UK, it is Scottish shoulders that remain the broadest of all. So it is a downright lie to even suggest that the broad shoulders of the UK are sustaining Scotland through this crisis. And what's more, Boris Johnson knows it's a lie. Thank you, DaviePHD.